Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 12th of July 2016, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We'll also be joined by live video Skype link by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. And David will be bringing some analysis of the very strange things happening with Britain's defence industry. Weather today in Plymouth is pretty good, and that's the same for most of the reports we've been getting across the country. I think we'll leave it at that. Well, he's gone. The cabbage patch has departed,
well, not quite. We've got one more day of him. But now anybody that's a long-time UK column reader will be aware of Cabbage Patch Dave, who was writing a column which always appeared on the back page of the physical newspaper. I'm delighted to say Cabbage Patch Dave has decided that he is going to give us a swan song this week. So he leaves number 10 Downing Street tomorrow. And by the end of play tomorrow, when he leaves, he has promised that the final Cabbage Patch column will be available for the UK column website.
Well, that's very good. I understand that when he'd given his departure speech, he went back into number 10, sort of humming a little tune, do. So right. He was obviously pretty stressed at the state of the country and the fact he'd departed. But who knows, perhaps they'll produce a proper plastic doll shaped like him.
Well, anybody that wants to see his previous escapades, they are available on the UK column website, so do have a look.
Okay, well, let's bring in the new Prime Minister, and here she is, Theresa May. These are some stills from a remarkable video clip posted by the BBC, where all Theresa May had to do was stand in front of the public and basically thank those who'd helped elect her. Well, that would leave the public out, of course. But all of a sudden, she seemed to fluff her lines with great stuttering. And I haven't been deliberately unkind in this photograph, because in the middle of what was a very, very simple address to the public that were present and the press, she suddenly stuttered and grimaced and got very flummoxed. Why should she do this? Because she wasn't speaking from the heart. She tried to remember the lines and fluffed it. And what was the key line where it all started? First, the need for strong, proven leadership to steer us through what will be uncertain economic and political times. But don't worry, because Brexit means Brexit. That is a lie, of course. And we need to unite our country. That means we're going to break up the UK, as we will be seeing. And there's a vision, Mike, for a country that works not for the privileged few, but for everybody. Another outright lie. So who was watching this performance? Well, I've got to say, The Living Dead is the best that I could get to. Have a look at these photographs for yourself. People lined up, lifeless beings, clapping in Theresa May. These were some of the words that came into my head. Artificial, utter propaganda, totally insincere, political sycophants, and then really just lifeless beings. There was nothing in their eyes. So my impression of Theresa May, and I'll certainly stick with it, is that she is an extremely dangerous woman, and we now see supported by people who've lost the will to live. But you've got a fan here, Mike.
No, well, he's not my fan, you understand.
Well, a fan of Theresa May.
Either, but a fan of Theresa May, just to clarify that. William Hague, writing in the Telegraph today, meticulous, steely, loyal to her friends, perhaps that's a dig at Michael Gove. Theresa May is the perfect person to lead us out of the EU, he says. It's a familiar scene in action movies when every participant in a deadly fight kills each other, leaving the heroine standing alone, unharmed and victorious, with bodies strewn around her. I'm almost struggling to keep my lunch down while I read this, Brian, I have to admit. But while this happens every day at the cinema, it is unprecedented in a modern party leadership election. The leading candidates who had fought on the Leave side of the referendum insisted that one of their numbers should be Prime Minister, but each in turn took action and made that impossible. The early collapse of the contest has denied Theresa May the added legitimacy of endorsement from the party membership. but awarded her a compensating advantage from the outset of her leadership that her opponents demonstrated rather spectacularly that uniting the party was not something they were presently equipped to do. So there you go. So this is all for Theresa. What a great woman Theresa is.
And this is Wicked Willie.
This is Wicked Willie doing that, and
standing up to be counted. Yes, at the excitement of Theresa May.
Right, and he then goes on to address the whole issue of Theresa's support for the police state. Because he says, I remember US officials complaining to me in 2012 about a refusal to extradite Gary McKinnon, the computer hacker with Asperger's syndrome accused of hacking into the Pentagon. Quotes, this was a decision made by the Home Secretary after considering all the facts, I said. Mrs. May is known in government for going into things thoroughly, but she is not known for changing her mind once she's made a decision. When she's decided something, my advice is to accept. That's the end of it. So there you go. And he ends off by saying Theresa May faces the most massive task for any prime minister in a generation. At least today, the Conservative Party and the country can be assured they will be taken on by someone with the inherent qualities to do it. So,
yes, she's got all the qualities. As we will see. Well, it's taken the Austrian finance minister, Hans Schelling, to actually tell the British public what is really going to happen in Britain now. So let's have a look at what he said on camera to the famous BBC. It is a decision by the inhabitants of Great Britain. If you look at other countries, you can change this decision by the Parliament. And I hope that the parliamentarians will make guidance on leave and not make Brexit. Now, the his English was pretty good, a few odd little nuances there, but essentially what he's saying is, well, the British public, the inhabitants of Great Britain, made a decision to get out of Europe, but in other countries, Parliament would be able to change this. Is he talking about Holland, where you have a vote, a referendum, and you simply ignore it? And I hope that the parliamentarians will make guidance on leave and not make a full Brexit. Well, if you think that's of interest, have a look at the next bit. Maybe there will be a Brexit light so that Scotland will not leave the EU, Northern Ireland will stay in the Union, and Great Britain becomes Little Britain. This man knows what the plan is, and this plan has been, this was the EU referendum PSYOP, which the UK column warned people about. So the plan is that we're not really going to leave. We are simply just going to be reduced to Little Britain.
Yes. Well, perhaps we get a bit more of a hint of this, because here is a campaign group. This is the the Constitution Reform Group. And this is an all-party group, apparently. And Brexit vote, they are saying, is paving the way for a federal union. We want to change the union that we've got and turn it into a federal union. The governance of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland should be reinvented, and that the new union should be completely voluntary. And this is a bid to save the UK from disintegration. The Constitution Reform Group is saying. Who's involved with this? Well, we have Ming Campbell, of course, and a number of other people. But Ming Campbell is of particular interest because if you have a look at this article from Martin Edwards, published recently on the column website, Distraction Politics and the Long March Towards Global Government, he is absolutely one of the people pushing for a campaign for a UN Parliamentary Assembly. So again, we're looking not only, in fact, we're taking the global governance model a step further. We've been discussing the global parliament of mayors recently to cope with the city-states, but now we're looking at a UN Parliamentary Assembly, a parliament of parliaments, perhaps.
Absolutely.
This is part and parcel of that global governance agenda, and this is another aspect of the EU referendum PSYOP, because actually it makes no difference whether we're in or out. All these other policy agendas are working under the surface.
Yeah. So I'm going to say these people are clearly anti-British. They're not interested in Britain as a nation state, be it Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. This is a globalist agenda running through. David, perhaps we could bring you in here to comment on this. What's your impression of Theresa May? Where do you think things are going?
Well, I can certainly say that I've had face-to-face contact with the majority of the leadsome backers. So this is Owen Paterson, Steve Baker, Ian Duncan Smith. And clearly they had some ideas that were in conflict. They probably, from what I can see, weren't going to follow this global agenda policy to the letter of what the plan and the construct is. So that's why obviously they were bumped. My impression of May is obviously she's been part of a cabinet government that have not tackled either of the two principal issues which they were engaged to do and mandated to do in the last general election, which was to bring down government borrowing, known as the deficit, i.e. that Mr Cameron, Mr Osborne, Letwin and co, all of them sat around the table there literally borrowing money in order to service the amount of debt and interest that we're in, so that they're playing catch up. So they failed to do anything about that. They failed to do anything about bringing the immigration numbers down to the numbers that they were saying. In fact, they're sort of radically in 100% over what they've spoken about. So in terms of success and so on, I just absolutely, on the fundamental stuff, no, just absolutely not. And clearly on the snooping end of it, which there have been quite a few people, and ironically, David Davis been very, very vocal about the government snooping and civil liberties side of stuff. What do we find him doing? Backing Theresa May. So it's almost as if we've got this duplicitous conduct amongst all of those MPs down there. And once again, we keep coming back to who has control of policy and who has control of everything from there on the money flow. So, no, I don't see realistically that there's any change at all under Theresa May, because all of the machinery that's got us to where we are is still there.
Oh, okay.
Indeed.
Yeah, well, Mike's just said indeed on that. And at this stage, we're going to bring in Nicola Sturgeon, because the situation north of the border getting fascinating. This remarkable picture, which should be accredited to the Express. So we've got Nicola Sturgeon dressed for death, basically. Remarkable photograph. She's in black. She could be attending a funeral. The piercing black eyes. And the title we've added there is Dressed for the Death of UK and the Rebirth of Little Britain, as the Austrian finance minister has said is coming. So the aim is to reduce Britain to utter chaos, the Scots against the English, against the Welsh, men against women, left against right, Tory against Labour. This whole thing is to produce instability. Well, she's been attacked by David Coburn, who's the heavyweight UKIP member up in Scotland. He said, "I speak for the 40% of Scots who voted against the European Union, and we know when we had the referendum that the decision would be made for the entire UK. Why does Miss Sturgeon continue to damage the Scottish economy with her nonsense?" And what he's getting at is all the unpleasantness and uncertainty. So here we can see that it doesn't matter where we look, north or south of the border, everything's being brought into a state of chaos and uncertainty. And of course, that leaves most of the public absolutely unsure as to who's really leading, what the direction is, and where the country should be headed. And of course, this is the route for disaster, and this is how Britain can be reduced from a relatively powerful country to Little Britain. And isn't it interesting he's chosen that expression after that pretty unpleasant TV programme, clearly taking the mickey out of us.
So leadership.
Leadership is the key thing. Future leadership.
And future leadership. Well, Civil Service Live is taking place today at the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre on the South Bank. And the first thing you'll notice from this picture, perhaps, is the choice of colours, the purple seats and the green. This is very
green
common
background,
purpose,
yeah.
Very common purpose colours there. What is Civil Service Live? Well, it's apparently now an established part of the public sector calendar. It's, they say, a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the civil service's achievements. It allows them to share experiences and ideas, and it allows them to showcase and be inspired by the great work being done by civil servants around the country. So it's all about leadership, it's all about networking and so on. Today they were running the Reimagine Challenge, and that's what you're seeing on screen at the moment. And this is being run by KPMG and the Cabinet Office in collaboration. They are reimagining how to use big data to reduce crime, apparently. So this is future crime and snooping. Thought crime. But it's basically the Snoopers Charter. Another thing that they're talking about or doing this during these sessions, another session is impactful leadership. And this is the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama at the University of London is going to be running that. So impactful leadership apparently requires you to be a good actor. So they're going to be doing some acting. They are doing some inclusive leadership as well, which is all about gaining knowledge, role modeling, mentoring, and building networks. And of course, that is the common purpose model. So this is a useful expression of taxpayers' time and civil servants, taxpayers' money and civil servants' time, isn't it?
No. We know what it's doing. It's gently reframing people to bring in the new agenda, which is everything will be okay in the future. Don't worry about any of the problems now. We've got to go through stress and turmoil now in order to get over the rainbow to be transformed into the new state, the new system of government.
Use the appropriate hand gestures, as you said.
Of course, use the NLP programming. Now, one of the things that this agenda is pushing very, very hard is to break up people. I've just talked about the clash of nations now within UK. This is all part of the agenda. But another one, of course, is to play the race card, to play the immigration card. And an extraordinary article by the Plymouth Herald here, racists are thriving, councillors stirring speech accuse UKIP of fueling hate. Please read this article because the whole article is about stirring hate, and some of the things that are said in it are just outrageous. UKIP is fueling racism and xenophobia. Politicians have created a vacuum for racism and xenophobia. This is all from one lady, the lady featured on the front page of the Herald there. The EU referendum has led to an increase in overt racism. And we should be able to bring in another one here. UKIP has, on social media, UKIP has been pushing racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, and homophobic material. Now, if I was able to look inside Councillor Philippa Davies' head, I think I would see a completely reframed person who doesn't actually think for herself. She is spewing out material which is designed to have people at each other's throats. So I could say in the first instance that she has been misled over what's happening, but it's possible that she believes what she's actually saying. The Tory leader has said we'll take a zero tolerance approach, so you whip up the hatred, and the local paper is assisting that by talking about it in these terms. And then the leader says, well, you get near this stuff, we're going to have the police on your doorstep effectively. You're going to be locked up because you're a racist, you're into xenophobia, Islamophobia. This is cultural Marxism with a vengeance. David, you've seen this sort of stuff before, and you've the experience of living up in the middle of the country. Where do you think this rhetoric has come from?
Well, it's the same inverse reversing technique that we've seen for quite some time. So there's a lot of that going on in the media up in the middle here, and it's almost as if they wish to achieve their agenda by approaching it sort of back to front. So continually talking up trouble and this sort of topography in the words and language they're using. They're actually causing the problem. They're not part of the solution. They're part of the problem. So it's almost the same as what we're seeing on the defence and industry front and the war front, of which we're going to come on to in a bit. So it's almost as if like we've got to back to front give birth to this by having this completely insane reverse argument. So the public have just got to see through it. It's as simple as that. You know, these people here are not contributing properly to the debate. You know, it's an inverse debate, and we've all just got to go. Just don't listen to what these people are saying, because they're not helpful.
Okay. Well, one of the key areas that they want to attack, the propaganda is aimed at, is dividing men and women, and there's various ways of doing this, but we're seeing a huge effort at the moment to promote women. Take us through a bit of it,
Well, I mean,
Mike.
this is part and parcel of the same thing, I think, Brian, as Dave has said. And I'm not going to focus too much on the content of what I'm actually showing here, but this is a Chatham House conference, Empowering Women for Economic Growth, the smart choice for the G20. And I just want to highlight the amount of similar stories, what Brexit means for women's rights in various places in the media, and of course, the whole glass ceiling thing really being pushed very hard at the moment. So perhaps this is being sparked off by the fact that Theresa May is the new Prime Minister. But nonetheless, what I believe we're seeing here, if we look at right across the media, is the politicization and the weaponization of women's rights, and it's designed to create tension in the same way that the whole xenophobe agenda is being pushed at the moment through the Brexit vote.
Yeah. So everything's being used, religion's being used, colour of your skin colours being used, men and women are being used, and then of course we've also got the other levels. We can play heterosexuals off against the gay community, against the transgender community. Everybody is to be put at each other's throats. And as David Ellis has just said, what we need to do is see through that and see these very dangerous tactics that are being used on the public. Well, if women are being promoted career-wise, of course, what's happening in the background is that their babies are being stolen. And none of us should forget that Home Secretary, now Prime Minister Theresa May, is directly implicated in the cover-up of child abuse and child stealing by the British state. We're just going to use two examples, but Theresa May was fully aware of the vicious abuse, the threats, the harassment that was being unleashed on Melanie Shaw, particularly by Nottinghamshire Constabulary, and also the abuse she suffered in Peterborough prison run by profit-making Sodexo. Despite all the information given to the Home Secretary, she did nothing. And of course, the reason for that is that Theresa May, is one of the senior British politicians who are absolutely terrified of the knowledge that Melanie Shaw holds as to who was abusing children in the Nottingham area. And that was not one children's home, Beechwood. We are talking about 7, 8, 9 different children's homes. We then come to this latest horror story, which is Janice and Brian Doherty, who have 4 children taken from them. They have not committed any crime. They have not been accused of any neglect or abuse of their children. They simply have their children taken after they report a man approaching them to buy their disabled son, to be able to buy him, to use him and abuse him. They report that to the state. They have their own children removed. Once again, Home Secretary Theresa May, now Prime Minister of Great Britain, Theresa May, has all the facts. She knows about the harassment, the threats, the intimidation. She knows those children have been taken unlawfully. And what has she done? Absolutely nothing. These are very, very dangerous times. And of course, the contrast, you boost women, you should have the professional jobs, but in the background, women are having rights stripped away from them because, of course, you're not even entitled to bring up your baby and child in safety. It's pretty outrageous stuff.
So the hypocrisy here is quite tangible. This is Joanna Shields, Baroness Shields. She's at the UN at the moment, launching her new initiative, We Protect. Beside her there is Matthew Rycroft, who's the UK's ambassador to the United Nations. They are talking about child trafficking and child sexual exploitation, including online. This is a truly global crime, and we've got to galvanize a global response, she said. So they're gathering at the United Nations in New York in partnership with UNICEF, and this is called the We Protect Global Alliance. So there's their website, and here's the actual Global Alliance website. Human trafficking, few victims go to court apparently because we don't protect them enough. As I say, this is in partnership with the United Nations, I believe, also with the European community. So I just want to, once again, as I did last week, highlight the fact that Rolly Post, a fantastic lady who has been campaigning for decades on the issue of human trafficking, specifically children, and child sexual exploitation. She is currently experiencing the most horrendous pressure, and from the European Union and the United Nations, they are attempting to section her, at least bring her under mental health provisions, invalidity procedures. The European Commission is being absolutely supported in this by the United Nations. So the hypocrisy of Baroness Shields going off to the UN to launch this this program of help, apparently for children, is unbelievable.
Or totally believable, Mike, because we now see through the whole thing. Well, we leave the issue of children there. Of course, what is the real priority of the British government at the moment? As always, it's war and death. I just put this tweet from Russia Today up, which I think sets the scene very nicely. So here they are really taking the mickey out of all the rhetoric out of NATO at the moment by saying Russia wants war. And look how close they, NATO, put their country to our military bases. So the Russians here, in a very simple diagram, a little bit of video clip, are showing what has been achieved by NATO and the European Union. Principally, we're talking, of course, the European Union, Merkel, Cameron and Obama, in bringing military forces right up to the Russian border, which, of course, is designed to rapidly increase tension and also to take over those Eastern Bloc countries. So the Russians seeing through this, and I was very interested at the speed that this was being retweeted, which says to me the British public are also waking up. Now, David, you weren't able to join us yesterday. I'm just going to recap on a little bit of the information we put out regarding British military to set the scene, and then we'd like to bring you in for comment on how you see things unfolding. Now, Boeing in particular is well on its way to taking over swathes of the British defence industry. But bearing in mind the Russian map there of those NATO bases on the border, sorry, let's bring in David Cameron, because here he was saying that we need to have stronger partners on the EU border. That's essential for Britain's security, but also our prosperity. Presumably we can suck the oil out of Eastern Europe. And UK expertise can play a crucial role in bringing about the reforms needed to build lasting stability in the region, especially in the face of Russian intimidation. And then we had Mr. Fallon himself saying that don't worry about Brexit because the military alliance with France will continue. We're going to cooperate over future equipment. And I know David Ellis has commented on this before, saying that this is how Britain's defence industry will be collapsed through the European cooperation. And in any case, Fallon says Britain and France are going to be working together in in Africa. David, what's your take on the language that we're seeing? We've got Britain operating now right up on the Russian borders. We've got Michael Fallon saying, well, we are going to come out of Europe, but no, we're not, because we're going to carry on working with the French. And we're going to cooperate on the procurement of equipment through the EU. Is this just incompetence, or is there an underlying plan to this?
Well, I don't doubt that I'm with Rodney Atkinson on this. You know, there is a great amount of ineptitude and incompetence, but clearly they're the language from Mike Fallon and David Cameron. on the eco-industrial collaboration that exists under the Franco British Council Lancaster House deal is clearly about going down the road towards ever closer EU military union, which ultimately is just a pincer move between Washington and the powers here in Europe. So that just looks like a sort of very much a kind of typical Zulu attack plan, of the horns of the buffalo and the loins. We're going to be drawn in on the one side, a feint from the other, and then we'll end up in the middle of the belly of the beast. So I don't see anything here currently going on that says that we're not getting away in terms of Brexit to paddle our own canoe economically, industrially, or militarily, which are the prime factors here for us as a nation and for the EU if they want to be a nation. So I can come at this from a good frame of reference. Before the end of the last Parliament, I'd spent a great deal of time with Bob Stewart on Defence Committee. So that's Bob Stewart, Conservative Beckenham, DSO. And what I was trying to establish with him, because he was prevaricating against the SDSR 2010 cuts, which obviously we had a great deal of interest in, and we thought, well, okay, we'll strike up a rapport with him and let's see if we can make some progress. And ultimately, what we ended up getting to was, whilst we were in agreement that contracting and cutting was a bad idea, in terms of then the policy and who was doing what and what the solutions to get out of the problem were, then we hit the wall. And I said to Bob before the end of the last Parliament, just as he was going into committee, that if we didn't make any sensible progress now, at that time, so this is going back, some years, is that we would ultimately be going back to the good old days of the Cold War, and he could expect to find himself in Kelvedon Hatch. At which point Bob said, "What's Kelvedon Hatch?" which I found rather bizarre. So he didn't know that that was the government nuclear default bunker for the middle of what we had during the middle of the Cold War, and he had no knowledge of it apparently. So I then said, well, unless we get to grips with policy, Bob, what are you doing with policy? Didn't get anywhere with that. He's obviously not doing anything with policy, despite he's on Defence Committee. So I said, well, who's currently writing British defence policy? I'll get back to you. So he got off the phone, come back to me and said, this is Joe Johnson is writing defence policy. I said, well, that's rather interesting, Bob, because I didn't think that Joe Johnson, as an ex-NM Rothschild banker, had got anything to do with defence policy currently. My understanding is it's being done by Georgina Butler, who's an ex-EU diplomat for Britain and a parliamentary candidate, and she's doing that in conjunction with Oliver Letwin. So this doesn't make any sense. Sorry, where are we going with this? At which point then it got very heated. Now we're coming full circle, aren't we? Because moving the clock forward to now, what are we seeing? Inverse reversing propaganda war to talk up and mitigate the military union and the economic union using Russia as an argument, which we've said now for over several shows. So the mechanics of that, are pretty apparent, and they're clear. And clearly, the only thing that the British government are currently doing is trying to dupe the British people, because they're certainly not fooling the Russians or anybody else over that side of the world. So we're seeing Richard Sharif now, General Sharif, who I have had dialogue with, and I've tried to make some sense in terms of what EU military union would mean long term. And what we're finding from Richard is he's writing a book and now expanding his company Strategia Worldwide with a great many experts now on his board, in effect, talking about war with Russia. And this is completely nonsense, because if this was the case, not a great deal has changed since 2010. So what on earth did we cut all those Harriers that had just had billions of pounds spent on them in an up-to-date refit, then to sell them to 10 pence to America for, when they were a fully tried and trusted British weapon system with all those jobs to boot in BAE, to then hemorrhage a vast quantity of currency on buying an F-35 that frankly is questionable at best. And then we find the same treadmill. We're almost repeating back to the days of Suez with Anthony Eden and the French under this Franco British Council thing. So that was a disaster. And we're seeing the full circle on the capital budgets and the procurement budgets with this purchase of the P-8 Boeing as what we saw under TSR2 and then the purchase of F-4 Phantoms. So instead of our companies here, BAE and all our engineers and everybody that's involved in engineering in this country, and industry and manufacturing, having that money flow go into our own UK economy, bearing in mind we are bankrupt at the moment beyond all belief. So where's all this extra money coming from? To then spend it with the Americans. I mean, it's a loss upon a loss upon a loss, and then there's a compound detrimental material impact upon our ability to support our currency because we won't have the industry. We're not making a plane. They've completely scuttled the Nimrod plan from 2010. You know, we had an operational fleet of Nimrods. Then on the progression with the fours, you know, they come up with this argument that doesn't work. Well, frankly, it didn't work because the MOD meddled with it. They meddled with it to such an extent that it didn't work. And now, oh, hey, presto, we're buying Boeing, you know.
David,
it just beggars belief. It just absolutely beggars belief, this contradictory policy over and over again.
David, an amazing analysis of what's going on. I'm laughing because I've got to the point that, you know, you can't help but laugh at the shambles unfolding. You're telling us quite calmly that senior military and political figures don't actually understand anymore how Britain's defence policy is made. They're not sure who's involved. They're not sure of the background of those people. We've talked on UK Column News about the Royal United Services Institute, and we've pointed out that we have, for example, a Romanian gentleman who is now busy helping form British defence policy. Don't know how he got that job. Don't know who voted him in, but that's the truth. We just bring on David Cameron here on screen to remind ourselves. This was Cameron saying that he was proud to be taking a lead role deploying troops across Eastern Europe. But of course, he hasn't got troops. The troops are virtually all gone. And to say that a deployment of 500 soldiers or 5,000 soldiers even into former Eastern Bloc countries is some form of strategic military statement is straight out of the Cabbage Patch book of military doctrine. It's just unbelievable. And then Mike was reporting that with regard to NATO, here we've got Cameron saying that we've got to tackle the threat we face from Russia, from terrorism and illegal migration. If there's no proper structure to defence policy, and certainly our politicians don't understand that, but we've got David Cameron confidently talking on a world stage about what's going on. Presumably, the Prime Minister and a couple of advisors are driving this mysterious policy.
Well, this is completely apparent now as to what my findings have been face to face with these people over a few years now. That there's one, you'll get the majority of MPs will just run off as soon as you want to talk about these big issues, and there are huge sums of money involved, and this sort of is contradictory to start with. So you think they would be interested because ultimately this is jobs and this is votes and so on, but no, they're not. And even under the referendum, where we've wanted Defence Committee members to challenge EU military union. Obviously, it's long-term goal to get hold of the budgetary control. You know, that's the game. Get hold of the budgetary control, get hold of the money, then we can dictate policy. So even under that, and a substantial list of people that we've tried to engage with, nothing. They just don't want to know. It's almost as if that this is done through some sort of Paul Daniels magic trick and a Ouija board. You know, I mean, where do they think that all this stuff is derived from? And when you're talking to key players, that then come back with the sort of comments that they're coming back about, particularly with and I recall very clearly with Bob Stewart challenging him about Russi and some of the members there that are pumping this stuff out, particularly the don't mind the gap. Well, frankly, I think we don't mind the gap, and we've created the gap, and the gap isn't a gap if you look upon it from an EU level or a Washington level. We're just not going to be. It's so frustrating that there are hardly any down there, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The only one that was prepared to talk sense was Norman Tebbit, bless him. Even as much as Owen Paterson wanted to challenge the leadership and get back into the cabinet and use the referendum, he hit the wall in terms of policy, because his fundamental thing was, well, BAE are a load of rubbish and we'll just buy American. I thought, whoa, Owen, it doesn't work like that. That solves no problem. That's not a solution for our country. We'll hemorrhage currency, we'll hemorrhage our industry. We cannot operate on that level. We have to be able to make stuff ourselves. It just doesn't work like that. That's not a solution for us to buy off-the-shelf American. We need BAE to be in a position like it was with Hawker and Avro and all the rest of it, and Campbell Laird and whoever else, Vickers, where before the 57 EU Sandys cabal got hold of it to take it into an EU framework, we were making stuff quite happily. It all worked. It was brilliant. We exported it. We derived currency in support to the pound in that model. And these people are just not getting it.
David,
they're hell bent on warring it up with Russia, and this is just complete bonkers.
David, let me emphasise some of this, and I can sense the frustration. It's very difficult to describe some of this, these events, because they are so utterly bizarre, and of course they're supposed to be to confuse people. But just remind ourselves, Mike yesterday was reporting on this huge Boeing deal with the Apache AH-64, so updated helicopter, we need these, and then announcement that we were going for Boeing P-8 maritime patrol aircraft. Now, you're talking money. This was about £3 billion worth altogether for the deal. Just have a look at what Michael Fallon is now saying about this Boeing P-8. He's saying that he's going to be using it to stop migrant smugglers. So we're going to spend whatever it is, £1 billion on aircraft which should be protecting the nuclear deterrent. And what is Fallon saying they're going to be used for? They're going to be looking for rubber life rafts in the channel. Either Mr. Fallon has really lost it. There's a hint of madness creeping in, and he ought to seek a bit of help. Or this is now. I pause at that point. What we are seeing is complete madness coming in. And I'll just bring this gentleman on because you were discussing him with me a couple of days ago, Howard Weldon, very popular with the BBC. So he's standing up and saying, well, this massive Boeing deal is good for UK defence. But as you are pointing out, it's absolutely not good for UK defence. We're not talking about the rights and wrong of running a defence industry. What we're saying is that if you spend all this money with the Americans, what you're not doing is providing jobs and security at home. So Howard Weldon seems to be in love with David Cameron, from what I could see.
Yeah, quite bizarre. I've spent quite a lot of time with Howard Weldon, a lot of dialogue, and my first interaction with him was within Parliament and a paper he was delivering to a lot of senior politicians and senior officers on Air Force. And he continually, this was about 2 years ago, he continually kept speaking about the Cold War. And it got to questions at the end, and I said to him, right, Howard, what do you understand the Cold War to have been derived from? And two, if you want the Cold War to be over, which was one of the sort of mantras that was pumped around a few years ago. And I said, well, frankly, if you're saying that the Cold War is over, what we would have had to have done would be to uninvent nuclear weapons completely globally. And Howard then said, we've got to continue to work on restrictions of nuclear weapons, and we need to sort of get back to the SALT talks, and get people to disarm. So I said, no, I'm not talking about disarmament. If you're saying that the Cold War is over, bearing in mind how it started, you would have to uninvent nuclear weapons. At which point he was lost. And a great many of the officers in the room acknowledged that I was correct. And post that, I wanted to get to grips with Howard, because he has the ear of a great many MPs in Parliament on EU military union and its looming prospects, the policy, the industrial implications, which is one of Howard's big interests, and the corporate interest, money flows, jobs, etc., the whole 9 yards. And Howard refused to even discuss EU military union.
Okay, David,
yeah.
I think we must leave it on that point. We'll certainly be coming back to this because it's such a critical subject. Thank you very much for a very detailed analysis. Where's it got us to? The fact that either the decision-making process in Britain is now out of control, or we've got something very, very nasty and devious unfolding. Money, of course, follow the money.
Yeah, we're just going to end with a couple of financial stories. So this is HSBC, which is apparently too big to prosecute. This is US officials admitting that they refused to prosecute HSBC for money laundering in 2012 because it could cause a, quote, global financial disaster. Who was driving this notion that it could cause a global financial disaster? It was none other than George Osborne, who wrote to the Department of Justice a letter basically saying that very serious implications for financial and economic stability, particularly in Europe and Asia, if HSBC were to be prosecuted for money laundering.
Yeah. He's looking very clean cut there, as he hasn't been drinking as much Coke, I take it.
I think it's an older photograph, Brian,
okay.
An older photograph, so it hasn't had quite the same effects yet. George Osborne, Chancellor of the Exchequer, intervened in the HSBC matter directly, and now he's just gone on his global world tour to tell us all how great the global financial system is. And we'll just end up with Mark Carney, who was giving evidence before the Treasury Select Committee this morning. I didn't get a chance to listen to too much of it, but one thing definitely jumped out at me, which was if you're taking out a mortgage at the moment, you should think about whether or not you can cope with interest rates being 3% higher than they are today. So a warning from carnage that there may be carnage coming.
Carnage coming, and for anybody who sort of doubts that, even I can remember mortgage rates, I think in the very early 70s or the mid 70s, were at about 16% at one point. So if you think you're sitting comfortable, these people can destroy your lives very quickly. We'll end on that happy note. What can we do about all of this? We have to wake people up to what's really happening instead of the sheer propaganda coming out through newspapers and the BBC in particular. And of course, once we can see the truth, then we are well on the way to finding solutions. Don't let any of them get away with it. If they're your MP and they're talking nonsense or dangerous rhetoric, it's up to you to challenge them. And if they're challenged publicly, you will see them crawl into the shadows remarkably quickly. So truth is the major weapon. And as always, stay reasonable, stay polite. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.